Record on this computer. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Simply SCAdian, no title required, season 3. This is Zoph. Lucas is very sick, so he was all gung ho about doing this, excited about starting season 3. But I told him in my best mom voice, get your butt off this computer and go to sleep. So that's what he's doing, and he is missed. For those who don't know, Simply SCAdian, no title required, is a show where we focus on those people who have not attained peerage in the SCA, nor baronetcy, court, or landed. We like to talk to people who are the aspiring, up and coming, some people that have never even really played in the SCA, just sort of stuck their foot in periodically. We want people who have genuine, real experiences in the SCA who aren't peers. And that's why we call it no title required. Tonight's guest is, and I got to pull up his bio. Hold on. Okay. Drake Oranwood has been a bard in the SCA for the last 10 years after a long stretch of inactivity. He sings, writes songs, plays lute guitar, and has been known to commit filk and other shenanigans strictly under duress, he assures you. He has served as Queen's and Consort's Bard for the East Kingdom and as a general in the First Bardic War. Drake released Hidden Gold, an album of bardic music, in 2015. In 2016, he co-produced and performed on Sing for the East, a collection of songs by bards of the East Kingdom. He is currently at work on his second solo album, Hold the Door Open. Drake's SCA persona is an English composer and lutenist living in the late Elizabethan period. He's a joint student of Peregrine the Illuminator of the East Kingdom and Toki Scott. Well, I don't even know how to say Toki's last name, so I'm not going to try. Of Aethelmark. Previously, he was apprenticed to Zoph of the Midrealm and studied under Lucien de Pontivy of the East. He is the founder and co-moderator of the SCA Neurodiversity Group on Facebook. Previously, he founded and co-moderated SCA Bardic Arts. That's a great bio. Thank you. You gave me so much to go off of. Welcome, Drake.
Hi, Mama Z. It's so good to see you again.
It's so good to see you. How are you? Let's just, how are you doing?
Oh, um, I'm doing okay. This is a complicated timeline, as you know. At the moment, I'm feeling good because my wife just got home from a little over a week away visiting with her aging parents down in Florida. And that was intense. And I missed her a lot, and I did my best to really man up an adult for the whole week. And I did it very imperfectly, and I feel really good about it because I focused on what does she need, and I think what she needs is to know that she doesn't have to worry about us at home.
Mhm.
So I really focused on that, and I held that thought, and I got to hug her and spend a little time with her, and I get to spend more of that because, of course, now she's home.
Yay. All right, so let's start off with the question we ask all of our guests. How did you find the SCA?
So that takes me all the way back. I saw it occasionally in passing in college. I went to Penn State. Um, but just literally in passing, I'd see people, in some gear going to do stuff. Right after I graduated, which would be 1990, yeah, it'd be the probably fall 1990. A mutual friend, a friend of a friend was involved. I live and have lived pretty much all my life in northern New Jersey, which puts me in Russet Woodlands in the East Kingdom. And so I was curious. I was out of college, living at home. I was lonely. And I really wanted to find something social to do with other geeks. And so I kind of reached out, and I attended some meetings and some dance practices, and I was a little involved, kind of very peripherally, for about a year and a half. I did get to know some people that I still know to some degree. Tanaka, because I knew him more or less when, he was already so well established even then. And there are a few other people who I'm still pretty good friends with that I know from way back then. But I didn't find what I was looking for, what I really wanted back then, I've always had a yen for performance. So I was looking for something involving theater, something involving, and I'm now in retrospect, I know that that stuff ebbs and flows. Um, it also depends where you are. You know, if I'd gotten into a car and driven 20 minutes or an hour south, especially if I'd say gone down to Setmore Swamp, um, I would have found something. I don't know what it looked like in the early 90s, but you know, there's a lot of different places, but I didn't. And so I kind of drifted away. And so Jess and I got married 2002, which is now, you know, so now we're jumping 10 years. And Jess was involved in the SCA from the time she was in college, and she has old friends that go way back. Um, and we get married in June, and we're having a conversation. She goes, "So you never got to Penzic?" I was like, "No, I never did. I heard about it. I heard it was really cool." She's like, "Okay, we have to go to Penzic this year then." And we went to Penzic, and I was like, "Oh, oh, so this is what an event looks like when you take all the walls off.
Yeah.
Wow, this is yeah." You know, and at this point, her old friends, Danny Del Cavallo and Ken Helm of Ethelmark, are both established and peers, and they can get us into all the good parties. So it was sort of a backstage pass to Penzic. Couple of years later, we went back with she was bordering on big with child, um, and that Penzic, I had a moment, and I'm breathing in that the grass and the dirt that you can just smell in the air because we're in West Merchant, you know, where they're camped, and I start pacing, and Jess looks at me, she goes, "Are you okay, honey?" And I said, "I'm writing." She goes, "Take your space." And I just start, I come get all full of this thing that's from an RPG that I maybe a little bit inspired by an RPG I did back when I was in college, and some other thoughts that all kind of crash. And the Bastard's Tale pours out of me in about 3 hours. And I kind of like it. Danny really likes it. And Danny starts whispering in my ear like a Praetorian guard, "Oh my gosh, this is going to be your thing. I'm going to introduce you like all the bards I know, and you're going to write more songs, and you're going to be a rock star." And then we had a kid, and we focused in on having a kid, and we learned about our kid, who was brilliant and amazing because he's 17 now. And we came to terms with some of the differences that he was showing up with, being super brilliant and on the spectrum. So I didn't SCA for a while. You know, we sat out for the next 5-6 years. But in the back of my head, I could still hear Danny's voice saying, "You're going to go do this. You're going to be a rock star." May or may not have been the best thing to have in the back of my head, but it was a dream deferred. And finally, we hit a point. Spencer's about 6, and he's doing really well. As he stays, an amazing young man.
He is. I'm gonna wait. Zoph,
Go ahead.
Zoph, legit. Drake's son is awesome. Okay, keep going.
Um, and we've hit that point where he's he's figured it out. He has figured out how to socialize, how to find his own kids. It's going to be a select thing, but he's going to find the kids he can gel with, and there are going to be issues. You know, not like ask me how I know what it's like to have issues. Um, but we're going to be okay, and we decide, what if we go to Penzic again? Let's try it. Let's try War Week. We'll stay in a hotel like we did, you know, before. And if we make it from Saturday to Wednesday before he has completely gotten sick of it and says, "I gotta go home," we'll call it a win. And he finds a couple of kids his age, one of whom I got to actually bump into this past Penzic, and who said, "Oh my gosh, yeah, you're Spencer's dad, right? Tell him hi for me." And we made it to Friday. We got in the car, and we felt really nice. We're starting to drive home. I go, so Spencer, that was the Penzic War. Do you think maybe you might be interested in doing this again sometime? He was like, Dad, we have to go back every year now. What are you talking about? And Jess and I are like, yes, one of us, one of us. And we have ever since, up until we stopped having them, But so for the last, is this something like the last 11 Penzics? We've been coming back, and once we did that, I decided it was going to be regular. And between that Penzic and the next Penzic, there came a point where I kind of said, okay, I've got a check I want to cash. I want to see if this could actually happen. Or I don't care about being a rock star. Yes, I do. But I want to be a bard. And I'd written a couple more songs. I had 3 in my pocket, and I said, let me go see if I can find. I need to find the secret handshake and find it, because there's clearly a community somewhere, and I just don't know where it is. And at one point, as we're trying to figure out for this next, this is 10 years ago. Let's go. Let's see if we can get there. And I'm going, I gotta find them. But there's got to be some group where they meet. And I look, and in theory, there are Yahoo groups, but they all have cobwebs on them. No one's even administering it. I put an invite, and it never gets accepted because no one's watching it. And I go, everyone's on Facebook at this point. It's kind of been true ever since, right? Hi, Facebook. And I go, so let me find the Bardic group on Facebook. And I go in a search, and I go, there's no Bardic group on Facebook. And then I go, there's no Bardic group on Facebook. Somebody should do something about that. And maybe that will be a good place and people will come. And I'll find the bards. And it kind of worked, and started that like a week before we headed off to that Penzic. Last I checked, it has something like 3,500 people in it. It's still pretty active. It was an amazing place to connect with people, and so that's the long story short. Too late.
Do you think that your friend did you a disservice by telling you you would be a rock star?
I think the biggest disservice there was less about I was gonna bumble. I have ADHD. I'm neurodivergent. I was gonna bumble my way into whatever. 53 years. That has been the way I face plant everywhere I go. And we'll talk about the SCA and what it's like to face plant there, because it's a special experience. And it's certainly, compared to some places, it's one of the places that's really worth it to me. To get knocked down and then get up again and never let them keep you down. Ooh, that should be a song. Sorry. But what was left out of that, of course, is Danny wasn't into Bardic. Danny didn't really have much personal experience with the Bardic community. So his outsider perspective left me with a really blinkered vision of how vast the ocean really was, in terms of talent, in terms of knowledge and wisdom and accrued years of creating what the SCA Bardic community is today out of whole cloth these last 50 plus years. Also left out lots of things I discovered along the way about how many people really hadn't been paying attention to what the Bardic community looks like today, and even looked like 10 years ago. And a lot of people had some outdated notions, but it's amazing. So I don't know. Sometimes, look, for me, and I know that the whole thing here is about kind of leaving the titles at the door and not worrying about that. Um, I've come to terms with the fact that it's okay to want things. Now, there's some ways in which that clashes with a lot of SCA culture, particularly if you are in service or on the arts and sciences track. If you are on a track that, in my estimation, much of the time is coded feminine, and where there's a set of behavioral expectations that's very different from if you do martial, which I don't. Um, you know, from what I've seen in that space, calling your shot and saying, this is what I want and I'm going after it is largely respected. Um, and the rules are a little different out here, certainly in the East Kingdom. Um, and so I learned a lot of those lessons the hard way. And you had to be the one who taught me a lot of them.
Yeah, well, I happen to make almost all that's the problem with us is we're so alike. I mean, like
Yeah.
I made so many mistakes. I know very well what my foot tastes like. Let's just put it that
Oh, yeah.
way.
Yeah. Corn
So,
chips.
yeah, so let's take it to a different place right now.
Sure.
You play the lute. So what's a lute guitar versus a lute, or is a lute guitar a lute?
So, a lute guitar is a guitar. Um, the things that distinguish it. So, a very very quick history of the lute. I teach a class about this. My guitar's persona is a lute. Um, and it's actually probably one of the most popular classes I teach. I have a lot of fun with it. It's a heck of an instrument. The guitar and the lute are very, very closely related instruments. They're kind of kissing cousins. The lute evolves from the oud, from Africa and the Middle East, comes into Europe. The major change between the oud and the lute is just the addition of fretting, actual frets, which give you those specific tones. And it starts out with only a few strings, and it is initially played with a plectrum. It's like usually like 4 strings. Over the years, as technology gets better, as they find ways to strengthen the neck of the instrument, it begins to be able to support more strings year by year, like century by century. By the time we get to 16th century, which is where I'm coming in, we're moving from the beginning of the 16th century is 6 strings, like a guitar, to 7, and by strings, I should say courses, which is pairs of strings except for the top one. They're tuned together. So at the end of the 16th century, the lute is the premier instrument of Europe. And as is an ongoing discussion in the SCA, or as people in Europe thought of it, in the world. But it is versatile. With the addition of the addition with more strings, finally people have come up with the idea of polyphony, the ability to actually make multiple notes together. So they finally throw away the plectrum, start finger plucking, so that you can create whole chords. In the next couple of centuries, the neck gets stronger and they keep adding courses until it turns into this unwieldy Leviathan with 13 pairs of strings. And around the Baroque period, it Baroque. And because around then you have full keyboard instruments, you have the harpsichord and you have pianos finally coming in. And around that point, there comes a point going, what do we need this monster for? It's not, it used to be really portable. Now it's gigantic. And it kind of dies and it goes away until the turn of the 20th century. And in Germany, there becomes I think they just unearthed some old tablature music, German tablature, which I've seen it, no idea how you play it. But the beautiful thing about lute and other, especially guitar-ish, limited number of strings instruments is tablature teaches you where to press where to hold it and what to play and what rhythm to play it in. So it's this mechanical approach to how do you play the piece. And someone said, they start going, we should play these. You know what we could do? You know what we should do? We should take our guitars, but want to get that vibe, that ambience. So let's take the guitar body because they're so much easier to tune now and keep in tune than they were. And we don't need pairs of strings really because our strings are much louder than the catgut strings they had back then. But let's put a nice round lute body on it. Let's put a nice ornate lute-esque head on it so it looks fancy. And voila, you have a lute guitar. And at some point, after I had been starting to learn lute music on guitar, I found out that there was basically, as I think Rory Anku said to me, it's a lute-backed guitar. The back is important. The look matters. You take the shoulders off, so it doesn't look modern. My really fancier one, which I call Rosalind, really has the full eggshell back, and it has the nice rosette over the sound hole, and you get a nice sound out of it. So you have that look and feel, but it stays in tune. It is much easier to tune. Now, I also actually do have, I got it at a bargain price, something that's probably 30, 40 years old. My friend Arden, who so often calls himself the instrument pimp, found on eBay and could get for $400 plus shipping, which once we got a good look at it, he said, yes, there's this one hairline crack, but it doesn't affect the sound. I got to tell you, if the person who owned this had fresh strings on it and knew how to play it and actually saw the sound that they were getting from this thing, they would never have let it go for less than $1,000. So you got a real bargain, but it's a real 13-string thing. Now you can get those today, but I've said, let me focus on walking before I can run. Let me use the 6-string instrument that's easier to tune and work on my repertoire. So Dowland, Campion, and just start working through these pieces and doing what is my ultimate challenge, which is I find songs that are really beautiful. There's gorgeous music in this repertoire, and it's early modern, so it's the tablature is not hard to read. Even the actual sheet music is not hard to read. It's very close. It goes through a couple of mutations in the coming 100, 150 years to basically be what we use now. But that ability to play and sing, it's the one part of my performer's repertoire where even to this day, I'm not completely confident. And I've learned that, okay, so what you have to do is you have to grind. You have to work this thing and work this thing relentlessly. And the quest to try and be selected to be a Kingdom Bard was a great millstone for me. It was a great place to really hone the blade. It took me 4 or 5 years, and it gave me 6 months from Penzik to to late winter, early spring, to say, okay, this is a piece, and I'm going to learn it. I'm going to learn it well enough to be able to play it confidently in front of that crowd, knowing that they're judging me. And all but one time, I would say I did that very successfully. One time I really overbit in terms of the ambition of the piece, and I had not taken into account that I really still had anxiety around it. And I got through the piece, but I choked. My fingers, I felt them turning to lead. I was like, 5 minutes ago, I went out to where, nobody could hear me. I ran this piece. It was fine. Oh my God, I have stage fright. I never had stage fright because I've really never done anything that I thought was that difficult. I'd never cared enough about something that I wasn't good at to want to grind and get better at it. And really, I want to say master it only in the sense of I want to take this task and I want to do this task excellently. I have in no way mastered the lute. I'd like to believe I have gotten myself to the level that probably somebody who really plays lute might consider me an advanced beginner or intermediate. I can play a handful of pieces fairly well. I can't play sight reading in front of anybody. I don't want to. I want to memorize the piece, really get the muscle memory in, and then I want to sing and play it in front of a crowd. And by the time I got to the place where I could confidently do a really challenging song at that level, and it was okay, practice in front of someone, whether it's on video or in person, practice in front of people that I know are going to look at my hands, practice in front of my friend Dave who plays guitar, run this song and get through those nerves and just do it and do it and do it until I'm bored of the stress, not of the song, but I'm bored of being stressed about it, and figure out there's this one place where I keep dropping a note. Drop one of those two notes. Nobody cares. Someone might care, but in this particular crowd, there might be 2-3 people who would know the piece well enough, maybe, and might catch in that split second, that 16th note, that you're only sounding two of the three notes that are two of the three strings. But the difference is, if I sound two of the strings and I don't drop the beat, and I don't lose my place, and I don't have a rictus smile on because I'm comfortable, what comes out is I want them to see the enjoyment. I want them to see how beautiful this piece of music is and how delightful it is to share it and give it over and create that ambiance. And some of the things that people said to me the last couple of years before I finally got chosen, and the journey doesn't end there. As it happens, 1 month later, the pandemic shut everything down.
Yeah, you poor thing. I felt so horrible for you when that happened
It
and you
looked
finally got it and then
it
COVID.
looked nothing like the brochure. It was in its own way a fascinating thing, and there was a certain amount, given the amount of time that I'd spent putting stuff out on YouTube, recording music, and kind of operating. I'm still in Rusted Woodlands, which is a perfectly lovely place. There is not a performance community here. So I was never trying to do this locally because there wasn't any locally to do it. I would go up to Albany, I would go up to Concordia, where they had a lot of bards, where I got to know Toki and Grim and that crowd. And but in some ways I was the online guy, right? The guy who was making YouTube videos and whatever, nothing particularly advanced, but I post stuff. And in a moment where we can't have events anymore, and this is going to be my term of service, it turns out that we're going to be going through a year where there's going to be a lot of online courts, and our royals are going, how do we make those entertaining? And I get, Drake, we have this video montage we want to do. Is there any chance you have a song or know a song that is exactly 98 beats per minute? And I go, that is really specific. And fascinatingly enough, I happen to have a piece, and because I have Logic Pro and I open it up, I have a piece that's exactly 98 beats a minute. It'll scan to this will scan on it really nicely. Let me take the vocal track off and just mix down everything else so that you just get the instrumental. All the stuff I didn't do. Dave's amazing guitar and Arden's amazing everything else, and my composition. Here you go. And it really worked nicely. I ended up providing like 3 or 4 songs for Coronation. And we videotaped, we recorded it outside. Tyndall coming in, his video editor, this is what he does. So it was kind of fun for not the year I was looking for, not the timeline I was interested in. It was a very Rudolph with your nose so bright moment, Oh my goodness, it turns out the thing that you particularly focus on, which wasn't necessarily the thing we were looking for from you, is coming in quite handy. So that worked out okay.
So you have one album out,
Yes.
and you helped produce a second album, The Songs for the East.
Mhm.
Tell me what's happening. What did you learn from those two experiences as you dive into making a second solo album?
So I learned all the things I don't really know about mixing. Um, but originally, Dave, my guitarist, had kind of pledged to be the sound engineer, and so he would record. But particularly if I wanted Arden, who comes in with and unloads the clown car with a harp and five drums and and four recorders and a viola and a violin and an octave violin, you know, a dozen instruments, and we're going to record 20 tracks today. And it quickly starts to become clear to me that if we're going to keep going at this rate, it's going to take forever if I need both of these very busy, very talented guys in the same room with me. And if I learn how to do the recording, which is mostly making sure I know how the file is set up, making sure that the space is set up properly and that the mic is placed properly, knowing how to listen to get the levels right, and then basically say, go and hitting record. And then deciding, what do we need more takes of, and figuring all that out. But if I can figure out how to do that, then the ability to get it done becomes much easier because I'm not doing this in a studio. Um, I'm saving the money and I'm instead investing the sweat equity, learning the knowledge. Ken Therio, known to many as Sir Kenneth Macquarie of Anstiora, he and his wife Adelaide de Beaumont, Lisa Therio, are friends and great inspirations of mine. And Ken's motto is knowledge trumps gear. That if you have $10,000 invested in gear, but you haven't taken the time to learn how to listen to the music and figure out how to use it, it isn't going to sound great no matter what you do. You can, however, spend a few $100s on consumer level stuff, which is decent quality. And if you learn how to, you learn how to listen to it, how to record it properly, how to mix it properly, you can create something that's really solid. Hidden Gold came out really solid. You were there. You on my. One of the things I learned was I needed people to bounce it off of. So I asked 5 people, including you and Arden and a few other friends, to go through the process of checking my mixes and telling me if I'm missing something, telling me if the rhythm was off. And afterwards, when we got to Sing for the East, I'd had a chance to let my ears rest, and I got to hear. I mean, it came out good. It came out really good. I'm super proud of it. And there's stuff I can't listen to anymore because it's so muddy at this end and this, that, and the other. I realized later that the mic I was using, when I did the research, it turned out that particular model mic has this problem at the high end, which is why all my sibilants sound like you're frying an egg. And I have to spend a lot of time then de-essing them, and it's tricky. So I spent $100 and got one, did the research, that is known for giving you a simple, clean, pure, straight up sound that doesn't add stuff to it. Now I don't have to fight that anymore. It's just a good, solid recording. But with Sing for the East, for one thing, Ken and Lisa were going to be got to be on that because Dorigen, my great grand Laurel through Toki, technically, I'm in the lineage. Welcome Home, it's beautiful, beautiful Pensic anthem, was one of the ones that we included. And what I presented to everybody was, I said, here's an opportunity. Because I've done this and I put some time in. And there is some fun to be had, taking the time to record the music and try to get your song in a form that people are now going to get to hear, and it's going to become definitive. And you have a choice. If you want, you can get whoever you want to produce your track. Anybody who doesn't have anybody else to do it, Arden has graciously volunteered, and he will take up the bulk of the work. So ultimately, what ends up happening is Ken and Lisa they perform and mix and master Welcome Home. they've been doing this for years. It's the first track I get. And it's, chef's kiss. It's just so good. It's a Ken and Lisa Scenario song that's going to be on this thing that we're putting out. And it means that I start listening to it as I'm mixing We Are the East. And I'm going, this is fat. This is full. This hits all the heights. What am I doing wrong? And I start going, that's what that compression button's for, isn't it? Oh. And I've seen it all this time, and I keep forgetting. I just keep turning the thing louder. Oh, with the compression button. Yes. What else am I missing? And then I bounce it off him directly. How do you feel like this mixes? And compared to the stuff that I'd done at In Gold, I've got something now that is, it's going to be rich because I like lush orchestration some of the time, for a piece that's, when I'm particularly going to pluck at the heartstrings, but I'm also being much more restrained. And that was a lovely thing I heard from some of the other people on the album. They're like, I really appreciate your restraint. The SCA is an amazing place for, I don't want to call them backhanded compliments, but
Backhanded compliments. Yeah,
well,
I'll call it like it
okay,
is.
where you get praise, and given the law, the rules of courtesy in the SCA about not giving people direct criticism or saying things that might hurt their feelings to their face. So sometimes you find out what people have been carefully not telling you when you finally get past it, so they can finally give you the praise that they were waiting to give you. And I'll take it. I mean, the SCA is amazing because you know what I learned really from this? I learned, and this ended up being the Elizabethan style piece that I wrote. People love it, but it's, a lot of people don't listen to the lyrics because the lyrics are about the idea that I asked someone to give me a gift. I asked someone to invest their time and effort in this project I wanted to make. And I was sitting here going, oh God, they're going to feel so put out and they're going to roll their eyes at me because I'm asking for more. But that's not what happens. And I've since then gotten the chance to be on the other side of that. When someone asks you, and this is one of the things that happens, particularly in the SCA, that I think is magical. When someone goes to you and says, Zoph, you have this quality. You know how to herd the cats. You know how to liven up an evening. I need you to MC for me, whatever it is. Or Drake, we could use someone to teach a class on stage presence. And I'm like, oh, damn. Y'all think I got stage presence? Y'all think I got stage presence to the point I could teach someone about stage presence? That's an interesting idea. Oh my gosh, you think I'm cool. That's when I ask someone to invest in a project, what they hear is me pouring, praise on them and basically saying, here's an opportunity. And I think you're the right person for this. And from their take, ooh, I get to step out of my comfort zone. I get to do something different from what I usually do. Arden and Dave in particular said they poured so much time and energy into making this thing happen and teaching me how to make it better. Toward the tail end of Hidden Gold, we went back to Bastard's Tale, which was the first one we'd done, and I thought it was so cool. And Arden said, I need to come in for a studio day. We got to redo about a third to half those tracks, because when we did that, I don't know that I realized quite the level of quality we were going to be getting to, because I hadn't realized just how hard you were going to work to try and get it there. And there's stuff on there I hadn't practiced enough that day. I really hadn't put in time. I could do that. I could do those things a lot better. And we came back in and he went through and he did the mandolin part. I'm like, oh my God. He said, yeah, I practiced this week. Because now I knew what I needed to match to. So We Are the East was a product of that. When I listened to it the first few times, I was like, oh my God, this sounds so much richer. There's so much more space for it. This is one of the things you and I talked about at the time, that I learned how to leave it light and gentle in the opening and let it build, and then let it get rich. And even then, still keep it back. Never flood the whole thing,
Right.
because it's about the story and it's about the emotion. And that works if you give it the space.
Mhm.
Um,
I always tell people, and I know I told you this, but 50 Miles into the Main is the perfect example of how to build a song by Ken and Lisa Theriot. They did Theriot. I don't know how to say their last
there
name.
you go. I finally found out when I hung out with them at Pensick.
Nice. So, but that song starts out so simple and just builds and builds and builds and builds, and you really have incorporated that into your pieces, the albums at least. So I am looking forward to the new album. When's it coming out?
So that's the big question. So I am setting as my stretch goal, I would love to bring it completed with me next year to 50, to Pensick 50. That'd be phenomenal, to have a new album. And I'm recognizing that one of the reasons Hidden Gold worked as well as it did was Jess saying to me, honey, do yourself a favor, give yourself an extra year. Don't try to get it done this coming Pensick, because you have maybe 8 months. I don't think you can get it done in that time. You're going to stress yourself out. You're going to burn everybody involved out. If you take that extra year and you breathe, I think you're going to get what you want out of it. You're going to get it to the quality that you want, and everyone's going to feel so much less freaked. So we have about a third. I mean, we got something like 5-6 tracks recorded. There's at least one that I kind of have to redo because I realized the tempo wasn't right. The stuff that's got loot that I want to play this time, I've got to sit down and shake all the rust off and actually get my loot skills back up to the point where I can record it and find out if I'm really capable of that at all. But what we have recorded, I'm really excited about it. So it may be that we just have to get moving again and it will all come together. But if it doesn't, then I'll wait a year. And if it doesn't come out for Pensick 50 and it comes out for Pensick 51, it'll be fine.
Right. All right, so we only have 15 minutes left, but I did want to take a
Yeah, please.
slight tack, excuse me here, and ask you about the
Neurodiversity.
neurodivergent group in
Yes.
on Facebook. How did that come into being?
So, um, thank you, because that is my other really big passion now, especially. Um, and I'm going to take a moment to do a tiny vocabulary thing, which is neurodiversity, or neurodiverse is what we use to describe a group of people, which is a mix of people who are neurotypical, meaning more or less toward the center of the bell curve, people who mostly blend in and who don't experience a tremendous amount of headwinds trying to just fit in and get through life, in terms of executive function, in terms of the way they learn, in terms of the way they manage their own emotions. So neurotypical people are the center of the bell curve, and indeed much of how the rest of us are evaluated, how all of the different conditions we might have are named, always pretty much comes from neurotypical people. Many of them about how we inconvenience them, how we make it more difficult for them to communicate. A neurodiverse group of people is inclusive, and it's perfectly, and there are, of course, this is all very intersectional. There are people who have lots of privilege in one regard and have lots of challenges in others. The term of art, which some people have been a little resistant to, but it's become very, very clear to me, not because I wanted it to be that way, not because I said so, because there's a community out there. And indeed, in the media, this is now a term that's big. You hit Google now and you Google the word neurodivergent, it is full on mainstream. I like the word because it describes where I am, not, it doesn't define me as entirely by my absence. as opposed to trying to call someone non-neurotypical. The other thing that's beautiful about the term neurodivergent is it nouns better than pretty much any of these other terms. Neurodivergence is a very clean way of saying the ways in which I occupy this very specific space that is not where most people expect, and is not where the behavior norms are necessarily built from. So I wanted to connect around that in the last few years in some of the same ways I had craved connection to the Bardic community, because it was becoming very clear to me, especially on Facebook and in person, people were sharing and talking. In particular, this has been an amazing time for people who have been underdiagnosed and very much undertreated, which in particular is women and people of color, because cis white males tend to be, I mean, I was diagnosed in the mid 90s with ADHD. And so it's going on 30 years, and this is the best I can do. But I also have a wealth of experience from that. Back in the 90s when I got my diagnosis, ADHD, as it's now called, ADD as it was called at the time, in adults, that was a big new thing. And I was participating in online forums about it. There were, for a minute in the mid 90s, there were several books about ADD out there where if you looked in the appendix, my AOL email address was on there as a resource, which was weird and very cool to be able to answer people's questions once in a while. So I wanted us to have a space. I want to be able to listen, because in case you hadn't noticed, I really find my story fascinating, and it gets old. And there's so many other stories out there, and there's so many people who aren't as comfortable, who don't necessarily take as much oxygen out of a room as I do, especially if I'm not looking carefully. It takes all these different shapes, but especially non-male presenting people who have been socialized towards towards feminine gender norms, which emphasize putting everyone else around you at ease, putting other people's comfort ahead of your own. And when you are trained really, really well from an early age to do that, it turns out that lots of different ways in which you might stick out get covered by masking behavior. They learn to mask really well. And it's impressive as heck. I mean, I'm frankly jealous so much of the time. So many of the people I know who are on the autism spectrum or have ADHD, and I wouldn't have guessed, because it doesn't manifest in them the way it manifests in me. It's just they get home at the end of a day and they're ready to collapse, because masking all day and doing the extra cognitive work that it requires for them to make space for other people when it doesn't necessarily come that easily to them, it can burn them out. So that's become a space where we can share, where we can not be alone, where we can vent a little bit if we're frustrated or if we're down on ourselves, and know that there are people who understand us, who will pick us up again and say, hey, I see you. I'm glad you're part of the SCA. And I really appreciate you. And that's been a joy. And just knowing that there's that space to go to, and that other people, when they're frustrated, can go there. It's just this one little thing. But goodness knows, the last couple of years, I'll take every one little thing I can get.
All right, we are almost out of time. So the final question that we always ask,
Mm-hmm.
what can the SCA do better?
I'm watching the SCA as it has made huge strides in the last couple of years to doing a number of things better. As the phrase that the song and the album both come from, holding the door open, which sometimes means shutting the door to people who don't want to hold the door open. But where do we still have room to grow? Look, it's this week and it's the elephant in the room. There is a difference between going, hey, COVID's getting better, and deciding to throw the baby out with the bathwater and just completely disbanding all of the safety procedures. Particularly, I had this conversation with someone just today. People who've made plans to go to an event that, when it was posted and planned for months, COVID protocols that were in place at the time were declared as what was going to be happening at that event. So people who, in many cases, are vulnerable, or immunocompromised, or have people in their home who are immunocompromised, or have suffered serious effects from their own COVID experiences, said, I can book and put the money in to go and do that thing because I know it's going to be safe. It's one thing to say we're going to lower our guard. The BOD said effective December 1st, right? We're going to start declaring victory. But to decide to retroactively change the conditions on the ground at events that people have already made plans and put money down to go and do, so that now they have to decide whether their hobby or their health is more important. We can do better on that.
Yeah,
we certainly could have at least said we are going to honor what we said were the conditions when we put this event out. Going forward, any new events, even ones that are posted in the near future, but if they're newly being announced, fine, they can be announced under, based on the conditions we now have on the ground, and you get to make your decision about whether you want to go or not. But it feels really deeply unfair to impose on people. A lot of people in the SCA have health issues. We are, as a community, we're an aging population. The other piece is the one that I dance around sometimes, that you and I know, which is, and I'm not always sure what the right answer is to this, our standard of courtesy. Courtesy is about making people comfortable. And that's important. Life is hard. We deserve to have our comfort and to be at rest and to be able to relax among our geeky friends. And sometimes things are important are going on, and it is sometimes someone's job to step up and make people uncomfortable. It's important that we not punish them for that. And the other piece is, the downside of courtesy is a code of silence. As part of the neurodivergent community, one of the things I found, and one of the big reasons I started the group, was that sense of operating in a vacuum where I'm going forward and I'm looking and I'm listening as hard as I know how, recognizing there are big gaps in my field of vision. So if I'm making mistakes, if I'm making people uncomfortable, I really need to know. It isn't obvious to me.
Right.
And it was hard finding out how long I'd been at it and how many people were having conversations and the way it evolves. And I don't consider this is not something in my experience anyone does intentionally, or at least very few. But organically, when the rules, the unwritten rules, say that you can't talk to that person and express to them that you think they're making a mistake, you need someone to talk to because you're really concerned. By the time it gets back to that person, what it sounds like is everyone's talking about you behind your back about what a problem you are.
Right. And I'm not going to tell you who they are.
And I'm not going to tell you who they are.
Oh, yeah.
I have a song, one of the recents that I really like, a retelling of Thomas the Rhymer, and the title is I Must Be Silent. And to give you an idea of just how deeply I have become socialized to accept these unwritten rules, nowhere on the page, and I wrote reams of notes about the sourcing, about the different versions, all of the thoughts that went into it, nowhere in there do I say that what really drove me emotionally and got me to the right place to get that piece out was that feeling of being watched and judged by people I couldn't ever see and I couldn't get to know their names.
Right.
And I suddenly had this hit of this is what Thomas the Rhymer must have felt like, bound to silence for 7 years in Elfland in service to the Queen. And I suddenly was like, oh, that's the song.
Yeah.
So the SCA is amazing as a place where you can really make great lemonade.
That's awesome. All right. It's time. We have filled almost an hour completely. This is so wonderful. Thank you so much, Drake, for being my guest tonight for season 3. I can't
Oh my
believe
gosh.
3
Thank
seasons.
you so much for
Wow.
inviting me. I know that you'd asked me before and the timing wasn't right. And I'm glad that, this was a good time and I had a great time talking with you.
Yay, it was wonderful. All right, you have been watching Simply Scadian. No title required. I am Zoph, and we will be back in 2 weeks. Not sure who our guest will be. I'm still working out the details, but I can tell you that they will not be a white cis male. That's been my goal.
Good.
Somebody asked me, like, I can't figure out your pattern. And I'm like, well, I go different kingdoms and I try to swap out. I don't like to have like two men right after
Right.
the other.
It's a
I want to have,
tapestry.
yeah, like all over the known world. And reminder, please, please, please send me a message. Send us Simply Scadian, no title required on Facebook. Send us a message. We love guest recommendations. Help us find the people that you think we should be talking to throughout the known world. Have a great evening. See you in 2 weeks.
Good night.